Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chats with Chelsi. Happy Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever day you're watching and listening. I hope that you're having a fabulous day because we have a very special guest with us today. I have someone that I met through a leadership development program who has decided to come and share some wisdom and knowledge with you. Ladies, let me introduce you to Andrea Goulet. She is the co-founder and CEO of Corgibytes. According to LinkedIn, y'all, LinkedIn, you know, where we create our profile so that we can have this professional image. She was named one of top 10 professionals in software under the age of 35. Yes, she's sitting right next to me. So we're going to get some great information and tips on all that she's doing professionally. She is a leader in the software industry. She helps the tech world communicate to those who have a different level of technical experience, as well as she is the founder of LegacyCode.rocks. She's a wife, mom, VCU guest lecturer, and ladies, she has done keynote speeches literally across the world. Ladies, welcome me and join me in welcoming Andrea to Chats with Chelsi. Welcome!
I'm so glad to be here.
I am thrilled. I mean, I feel like it was a few weeks ago, maybe a little less than that, but sitting there listening to you share your story, it gave me so much energy, so much inspiration. And then I love that afterwards, I think we chatted maybe for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You truly are who you show the world you are. And so I'm just so grateful that you are that. So let's just dive in.
Okay.
Let's have this chat. So, software industry.
Yeah.
When I think about the software industry, I'm just going to be really honest. I think of white men.
Yeah, 100%. I do too.
And here you are. You've been recognized by LinkedIn. You've been asked to come and speak at some of the largest software conferences across the world. Tell us how you got started.
Yeah. I did not think that I would end up in software. I went to high school. You know, I was somebody who was really interested in using technology. I never thought that I had permission to build technology.
Ooh, permission.
Yeah, because it was like all of the people I saw were like white, they were men, like they were, I'm white, but they didn't necessarily look like me. It was like I didn't want to join a group of people where I felt like I didn't belong. And I think the software industry in general has a long way to go in the diversity, inclusion, belonging, right? And I think one of the things that's been great is that now that I've kind of figured out how to make my way in there, I can be a voice and be a voice for change. And now I'm getting more leadership opportunities. And so it's a great place for me to do some personal advocacy in the industry that I'm in. But the way I got in was I went to my high school reunion, and a friend of mine from high school, his name's Scott, came up to me, and I had been writing a blog. My degree is in marketing and business law, and I love branding and strategic communications and all of that. And he said, I've been reading your blog, and I have news for you. You're not a marketer, you're a software developer. And I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Had you even coded at that point?
No. Well, I didn't think that I had. So this is going to show my age, but I had done my HTML from my MySpace, and I had done stuff like that, but I didn't ever think that I had the capability. I thought, no, those are, because I got frustrated. I tried setting up my own WordPress site, and I just hated it, and I got it working, but I was like, no, that's you, Scott.
This was back in the day, though, with WordPress, before they had these easy setup templates.
Well, even then, it was just, so I had to self-host and all this. Yeah, it was a lot, right? Reading through all the documentation. Yeah. Anyway, so Scott then came up to me and said, no, he goes, well, I've been reading your blog, and software is really just three things. It's inputs, algorithms, and outputs. He goes, you take a bunch of data, you take a bunch of information, you scramble it around using patterns and logic, and then you get an output. And he said, from reading your marketing blog, that's what you're doing with communication. He goes, you're taking groups of people, you're taking target markets, you're taking all these, at the time it would have been called drip campaigns, because I had talked about how you need to hyper segment, how you use empathy to actually get to know someone, and then how you can, use a database and, use all these different tools to segment and then put in very specific information and really reach somebody, and that's the output. And he goes, so don't be mistaken, like you think you're doing marketing and communications, but you're really writing software. I was like, oh, okay. I never thought of it that way. And he goes, by the way, I have a startup I've been doing for about a year, and I love building software. Because Scott was at our high school, he was the president of the computer club. Like, no surprise when he came up to the reunion and was like, I'm a software developer. Everyone was like, saw that coming. 100 miles away. And he said, I know how to build all the software. I have very specific opinions on how software should be developed, but I have a branding problem.
Ooh.
I have a marketing problem. I've been working for a year, and I don't know what my product is. I don't know how to make money doing this. And so he said, I'd rather have 49% of something amazing than 100% of nothing.
Ooh.
And so he asked me if I would come on board and be his boss. And he said, I have 51% equity that I'll give you right now. Otherwise, I'm going to dissolve the company.
So, okay.
Yeah. And it was like, what?
So
this all happened in a couple of days, yeah. So
what were you doing, though, in that season?
I was working at Capital One as a copywriter. And I had been working freelance as a copywriter for years. I had worked in sales. I've run my own business since I was 12, right? So just I've always had a very entrepreneurial, self-starter kind of mindset.
Okay.
And he wanted to have that, and he's got some of that, but he needed that activator kind of energy. So we decided, I was it took me a few months to kind of survey the land and see kind of whether or not it would be a good fit. But then ultimately I was like, well, we're good friends from school. We'll give it a shot for a year. And if it doesn't work, then, it'll be fine. There's really no risk. So then we worked for a year. Within a year, I knew how to do all the sales stuff. So we had clients kind of right away. It took us a while to kind of figure out what our niche was. But eventually we settled on legacy code, which is code that's notoriously hard to work with.
Okay.
Right? It's the code that is just cluttered. I think about it as house. You drive by those houses, or you've seen the houses on Property Brothers or Fixer Upper, where it's oh, that's so sad. Look at that 70s paper, and I see the bones, but ooh, it needs some love, right?
Okay.
So legacy code is very similar, right? And you can think about it, the digital version of all of those houses, right? And what I didn't realize at the time was that the reason that legacy projects get to that state is because of poor communication. I had no idea. I really didn't. And so it took about 7-8 years, because we've been doing this now 10 years. So, and about 6-7 years in, I started saying, you know what, I'm just going to talk about what I know. I'm not going to try to pretend to be someone I'm not anymore, because I was trying to puff myself up, look really smart. And I was like, no, I'm passionate about communication. I'm going to talk about empathy. I'm going to talk about all this stuff that we really need in software that's preventing us. And then that's when my career took off. It was really fascinating. Oh, important note too. 3 years after starting the business, Scott and I got married. So
yes. We were going to get to that.
I sometimes forget to tell people that, and then I talk about how we have kids and stuff, and people are like, what? Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into that for all of our sister friends who are listening. And maybe dating someone at work or what. So we're going to get into that, right? Yeah. But I want to go back to something you said. Why did you feel that you had to put on the air of being, smart or what was that about? Was it because of the field or because you weren't familiar with the field? What was that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was I felt othered in many ways. So my very first experience, I came from marketing communication where it's very diverse, right? It's pretty gender balanced. Like there's a lot of different people from all sorts of cultures and everything. Like it felt, and I went to VCU, which is incredibly diverse as well.
Absolutely.
Like I was like, oh, okay, this is the way the world is. And then when I went into software, I was like, where did I go? My very first conference in 2009, there were about 400 people there. I was one of 2 women.
Out of 400
Out of 400 people. Yeah. And
for software.
This is a Ruby on Rails conference. Yep. And that was normal. It's still I'm usually the only woman in the room. It still hovers around maybe 20%. Best conferences, 30%. But I am always somebody who stands out. And I have been asked, so when I went to that conference, what I got was, what are you doing here? Are you a recruiter? And I was like, no, I'm the CEO of a software company. Like, and they're like, oh, well, you don't look like you would be that. And I got that explicit, like, you don't look like you belong here. And I don't think anybody was trying to be mean.
Okay.
Right? It's just, they're operating from what they know, right? This is all the unconscious bias stuff, right?
Right.
And I was like, I just felt it so strongly and so head on that I was like, well, maybe if I act like them. And so in the software world, you see a lot of different people who will have different strategies. So some women try to hyper-masculinize. I tried that for a while. I have when somebody told me, they're like, oh, well, if you dye your hair like green, then you'll stand out and you won't be threatening to men. And they'll take you more seriously.
Did you do that?
No, I thought about it, but I never actually got there. I mean, I'm all for it, but like, I think you should be able to dye your hair green if you want to dye your hair green, not because you have to be taken seriously in your field, right?
I agree.
So it was like all these strange social things that I had to navigate, and a big part of it was I felt like I wasn't enough. And then I landed on Brené Brown and read her book Daring Greatly, and it spoke so much to everything that I was feeling. I felt shame because I felt like I wasn't good at what I did, I wasn't smart enough, like I didn't understand some of the analytical concepts. The way Scott describes it is, like, for me, with our business, there's languages in software just like there's languages in, like, French, Spanish, English.
Right.
So I'm trying to learn 19 different languages at once because we do every language at our business. We don't specialize in one thing. And so I'm constantly, like, if you're trying to learn French and German and everything all at the same time, of course you're going to trip up on words. And so what I tell myself is like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing because sometimes the syntax isn't right or I make a grammatical error. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. You're really good at spotting patterns and you're really good at all this stuff, but I can't see it for myself, right? Mm-hmm. So I was trying to be smart and be like, oh, I was trying to show people that I was smart, right? I think there's a difference. Like, and then, a few years ago, I was just like, you know what? The thing that's broken is communication. Like, and I had attended a conference and saw a talk about a concept called Conways Law.
Okay. Which
seems so small and innocuous, but it's so funny how, like, such small things can have such a big impact on our career.
Right.
So it was a guy named Michael Feathers who is basically the godfather of legacy code. He wrote a book 10 years ago. It's a seminal work. Like, everyone knows who he is in our small community. And he talked about this concept called Conway's Law, which states that any organization that creates a system, right? So that could be so a brand that creates a sister company, or, a organization that creates a foundation, right? A business that creates some software, right? That's a subsystem. Well, that subsystem is bound to architecturally be a mirror image of whatever communication infrastructure is used to uphold the bigger system. I was like, so what that means in software is that you can't re-architect a software system without addressing the culture and the communication of the organization. Like, you can't do it. Like, just, it's a principle. And then I kept hearing a joke over and over again too, saying there's only 2 hard problems in software.
Okay.
Cache invalidation, naming things, and off by 1 errors. And so, but I was like, I kept hearing naming things. I was like, y'all think naming things is hard? like, I worked as a copywriter for years. Like,
right.
the naming, y'all need help with that? All right, I'll teach you, because Lord knows we need some better error messages. So I just started kind of getting more comfortable and saying, like, I'm just going to say my lens of, and then when I started embracing that and saying, I care about empathy, I care about communication, I care about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, like, these are the things that I'm going to talk about.
Right.
And if you want me at your conference, that's going to be my kind of platform, and these are the talks that I've structured. It's been amazing because I'm speaking with more truth, I'm speaking with more confidence, I'm able to pull ideas that are original because I have that fresh perspective and because I'm not like everybody else. And so that's starting to become something that's now more of an asset, whereas before I was really holding back.
Yeah. So what was it from Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, that was the switch?
I think so. It was her 10 things about imperfection, and the biggest thing I think I took away was perfectionism. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to be delivered from that.
So, and it was really interesting too, because when I was in school, so Scott and I went to high school together, right? And he's like,
right.
He remembers me, and this was me in high school. Oh my God, Scott, I totally failed that test. What do you mean you failed that test, Andrea? You got like a 98, right? And I was like, well, yeah, but technically. But anything less than 100, I consider a failure, right? And like, I think so many high-achieving women, like, we've just set the bar, and then we keep moving it. Like, that's at least my thing, is like, I never allow myself to settle. I never allow myself to kind of say, oh, that was good enough. And so that was fine kind of in the early stages of my career. Once I had kids, though, and once I entered motherhood, that really became a problem. And I remember being at an organization, I was working in an agency doing marketing stuff, and I said to all my clients, I was like, oh, you don't have to worry, you're in good hands, because I'm not type A. I'm type A plus, right? Like, I was that person who was like way detail-oriented, was going to make sure everything was good, and it nearly broke me. Mm. Yeah, so, and then why did it break me? So, Brene Brown describes perfectionism is if I look perfect and act perfect, then I will shield myself from shame and blame. Like, and that's what I was trying to do. Like, I was trying to put on this shield of like, look at me, I'm the CEO, I know what I'm doing, like, I'm smart, like, and then understanding shame, which is believing that you don't belong, right? And not just on kind of, the external world, but on the internal side too. And so that, navigating all of that, like, I feel like I can speak truth to it because I'm living it and because it's something I'm constantly struggling with. I speak at VCU every semester as much as I can. And I give a talk on imposter syndrome and, growth mindset and like all these things that I've learned. And every single time, like, I was like, I am so glad that I got to give this talk, y'all, because I needed to hear this. Right? Like, I hear, like, whenever my bio is read, I'm always like, yep, that's me. It's hard for me to own my accomplishments. But I think so many of us...
We struggle with that. And, as you talk about being, from her book, The Perfectionist Syndrome, one of the things that, because... Type A. I hadn't learned type A plus yet, but
don't go there. Like, I'm trying. This was funny. 2 or 3 years ago, I was at church and I told my friend, I was like, okay, here's my New Year's resolution. I'm gonna be more type B. Here's my Excel spreadsheet with all my goals and milestones. And she goes, you've already messed up. Like, no.
Yeah, you're still type A plus. One of the things, though, that I've learned is that for women like us who are type A plus, is that in that shield that we put up, as you were sharing, for blame and shame, it's also a lack of grace that we provide ourselves.
100%.
And and then, because I love how even in our conversations before and after, there's questioning. And so it's, why am I not worthy of grace?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, like, I've been in therapy for a really long time, right?
Therapists are good. Therapists are great.
Yeah.
You shouldn't deal with things. You shouldn't have to deal with things on your own.
Well, and I think it's good to have somebody who can help you, like, really honed down. Like I think of like kind of like a guide, like a Sherpa in some ways, of like trying to help me navigate this inner space.
Right.
But the thing, like it's been years, and now we've kind of like peeled back the onion enough, and the deep-seated belief that I have about myself is that I'm disposable. Would you believe that? Right? Yeah. Like that's what I'm working on right now. Is like that's the, if you were to get down to a core nugget belief, like that's what I'm working with every day. And so a lot of times the projecting is like, no, see,
I have value.
But those are external things. They're not internal things. And so it's like trying to have more, I love the word grace. That's exactly what it is, because it's like, I need to learn that I'm lovable just because I am, not because
of what I
do. One of my friends at church said, there's a reason that we're called human beings and not human doings.
I love that.
Yeah. So, so I think that's part of it. It's so easy to, and once I kind of started figuring this stuff out, I was like, I'm just going to be 100% open about kind of where I am. And because it's so easy to see people who have achieved so much and think that they have it all put together. But I think I've been struggling more with the success that comes, and like you've really got to do a lot of that deep inner work in order to be able to thrive in a bigger arena.
And then not only that, I like to give both sides of the spectrum, is that you see people with success. It's something I remember. I was in the UK at a church, and one of the pastors said, you see the glory, but you don't know the story. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is, as we're talking about, as your friend said, we're human beings, and that grace that we should accept for ourselves. It's just the fact that there may be a day when we're not as successful as we used to be, and are we going to be okay if we've only found our worth and value in that continual? And so that's something that I had to deal with and really work through, especially when I moved here. In Florida, I was heavy in politics. I was on TV, writing, national columnist. And when I came here and started over, I think it was perfect in God's timing for me to be able to see. And even though the journey still continues, as you know, but it's been, who is Chelsi?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Who am I? And not who am I because I was the first to do this or that. And I know that I'm not the only woman who has struggled with identifying who I am based off what I've achieved. 100%.
And I think you go through it a lot, and especially at transition times. Like I went through a really challenging divorce when I was in my mid-20s. And I had grown up being like, no, divorce. If you divorce, you are a bad, evil person who's going to hell, right? But this ended up being exactly what had to happen. And going through all that, it was like, I felt like a failure. I felt like all of this. But then, with, struggling whether or not I'm a good mom, I found that whenever there's transition, there's space for doubt. Right. And trying to redefine yourself. And in some ways I found that I started chasing. I think that's kind of like, I didn't want to settle into any one thing because I got to recreate myself every time I changed. So then it was like constant chaos, because then it's like, we don't know who Andrea is, right? Or this, like, I'm very adaptable, and that can be a very good thing. But then it's that who am I really? Like, you could throw me in any situation, I will learn it, I'm smart, I'll figure it out, right? But is it something that I truly want to be doing? Is it something that I feel called to do? Or is it something that I'm just doing because other people expect me to do it? Ooh. Or of how I'm going to look? Like, there's...
That, for me, that speaks volume, because I spent 3 years as a local elected official. I spent several years working for a statewide elected official in Florida, and I've done government here. And when I moved here, everyone expected me right away to get involved with politics. I moved here. People heard about the things that I'd done in Florida and started approaching me. And I was a newlywed.
Yeah.
Not only was I newlywed, but I married a pastor. And I just didn't feel it didn't feel that that's where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it took me probably a good year to realize that my identity wasn't in politics or the political party that I was associated with or the things that I had done, and that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And to not keep, to your point, to not keep chasing something that, it's not to say I won't be involved in politics or but to understand that there are seasons and God calls us to certain seasons, certain places, 100%. And to be open to that, or otherwise we'll find ourselves, or I can speak for myself, I would find myself chasing politics the way that I had done it in Florida.
Right.
Still engaged to an extent, but not as much as I was in Florida. And I've come to realize that, to all my political friends, I love you all, okay? I may ask you for donations one day. But that my identity wasn't in the political. Yeah. And that Chelsi's here. She has a podcast. She has a foundation. Yeah. But it wasn't easy.
Right. And I think this is something that high achieving women, I think, struggle with, is that you have the skills where you can do freaking anything. Right? Like, I bet if somebody dropped you in the software world, you would do exactly like I did. You're like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know. Like, but you would read everything. Like, you would get
YouTube videos.
Right? Like, I mean, that's kind of how we do, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm going to navigate this as best I can, and I'm going to learn it, right? But then it's like, do you really love it?
Ooh.
And just because you're skilled at something doesn't mean that you are required to do it.
Step on toes, please.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm struggling with right now is, like, you know, board service. Like, people are asking me to serve on boards. And there's some of me that, like, loves it, but, you know, there's others where I just feel like I'm not making an impact and so now I'm like, I'm saying no and I'm stepping down and I feel awful. I feel like I'm leaving people behind and I'm like, but there's a great book, Essentialism, by Greg McCowan, I think.
Yes.
And, like, I read that and he's like, unless you say something that's like a hell yes, it needs to be a no, because otherwise every yes that you say is taking up space for an opportunity that could be coming along.
Ooh.
And so
I need to go back and read that.
Yeah.
You're dropping. So I have Daring Greatly on Audible. I haven't finished listening to it, but I think that you just reminded me I need to make
that one's really good. She came out with a new one that's business focused too, called Dare to Lead, and it's so good. And I read. Well, I do the same thing. I just listen to Audible and, like, I'm in the car or on a plane or something and just, it's good stuff.
You know, I'm loving our chat today, you know, because when people, this was what I envisioned, so I'm just so grateful, because when people go to your podcast or they hear you at a keynote somewhere across the world, they're going to hear you really being that intersection between the communication and technical, and I'm so grateful that we're having this opportunity to really have girl talk. So we've talked about what it's been like to be a female in the software industry space. So let's go back. I know there's some ladies watching who are just holding on, right? Sitting on the edge of their seats because they want to know how you and Scott went from him first. You went to high school together.
We went to high school together.
He came to you and said, "Hey, I want you to be my boss." Gave you 51% of the company, and then 3 years in, you're married. Tell us. Yeah. Tell us your story and then give some advice to the women out there.
Well, okay, so Scott and I were really good friends in high school.
Okay.
And we kind of...
Did you like each other?
We did, but we never dated.
Okay.
And it was funny, because so he was always dating somebody while I was dating somebody. You know how it goes, right? And so...
Me and John.
So, when I was in, I guess, a junior in high school... Yeah, so I had a long-term boyfriend, 10 months. That was like forever, right?
Right, it's high school.
Yeah. And
that's a whole year.
So this was like around spring, like right before prom. He broke up with me and asked out my best friend to prom. And that sounds silly now. That was very traumatic. That was like...
No, that's still traumatic.
Yeah. It's your and then, well, on top of it, because, like, you know, it's high school, and so it's like all of our friends that we had together, like, I lost my boyfriend, my best friend, and my entire network of friends because they were like, oh, well, we don't want to choose sides, but it's 2 against 1. So it was just, so I felt so lonely, so broken, so isolated, so all of this. Anyway, so Scott said, we were at Myrtle Beach on like a band trip. We were both in marching band. And he was like, let's go for a walk on the beach. And I was just ranting. I was like, I hate men. I'm going to become a nun because this is just like too much. Men just hurt you and destroy you, and all they want to do is sleep with you, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I'm ranting about how upset I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm very grateful for Scott. But then he comes around, and so Scott goes, okay, she's single. She's single. The timing is, I have to ask her out. So in his head, what's going through his mind is, no matter what she says, I'm going to ask her out. No matter what she says, I'm going to ask her out. No matter what she says. And so I'm like, I hate this. I'm so glad that I can confide in you, Scott, and you're not trying to ask me out. Like, he didn't listen to any of that. So then, like, we turn around, and then he asks me out, and the way he described, I started crying. I fell to the beach. I slammed my hands on the sand, and I was like, why, God, why? This is so unfair. Like, this feels like my last friend in the whole world.
And he wants
to like, you, and so after that, here is a really important thing. So that at that moment, he goes, well, now you know how I feel, so if you ever change your mind, let me know. I was so upset in my own drama, I didn't hear anything he said.
Right.
So, you know, a couple years go by, and, like, we go back to being friends, but we never explore anything beyond that, because he's like, well, I told you how I feel, and if you really wanted to date me, like, you would have said something, and I didn't, because
you really didn't hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I remember, like, he got married really young. He got married at 20. And I just remember, like, being where I remember exactly where I was, and, like, remember my heart sinking to the floor and being like, no, that's not right. Like, just, like, an intuition of some kind. And, like, you know, then you kind of let it go. But yeah, and then I knew very clearly that my high school reunion was going to change my life. I knew that from when I was, like, 22. I was like, no matter where I am in the world, I have to be at that reunion.
Was it something?
I didn't know why. Yeah, it was
it a movie you watched?
No, it was an internal knowing, right? Like,
had to be there.
I had to be there, and I didn't know what it was going to be, but, like, I just knew, like, this is so critical that, like, you have to change. No matter what, you have to make this a priority.
Right.
It felt like a calling. And so then I got a text message from Scott the night before the reunion, and, like, a Facebook message, and he asked if I was going to be there. And I was out to dinner with my parents, and my parents go, who's that? I was like, oh, it's Scott Ford from high school, and he's asked if I'm going to be there. And they were like, Scott Ford, isn't he the really geeky kid who's into computers and Star Wars? I was like, yeah, that's him. He's going to ask me out. And they were like, how do you know that? I was like, I don't know. I just know. And what was funny was that he was at his parents', he was having dinner with his parents at the exact same time. He was planning on not going. He had just hit rock bottom. He had had a divorce. And he was struggling with some medical issues that were making it really hard for him to do his job. So he was on a leave of absence and trying to figure out. So he was in the process of moving back home with his parents, like, literally the day before the reunion. And so he was like, what am I going to do? Go to the reunion and tell everybody that, like, I'm moving back home with my parents because this and that? And so then his parents were like, well, who do you know? Like, just scroll through Facebook. And because my name starts with A, it was like...
Yeah.
And so, and his mom, she'd been wanting us to get together since we were, like, 12. Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff kind of happening behind the scenes, right? That I think it's important for the backstory.
Oh, yes.
So...
Always.
Yes, so I went to the reunion primed and spiritually, I think,
ready,
open,
okay,
to something significant is going to happen, and you just have to roll with it.
But so when you left the reunion, though, the significant thing was him asking you to be his boss.
Yeah.
Tell us how you still. I mean.
So at the bar. So that happened first, right? Okay. Technically. So you know, the conversation about the business and everything happened first. Then it was like an hour later, And I was trying to be a social butterfly and like talk to everybody so that then I could talk to Scott. Scott is the most introverted person I know. He's sat like by the corner of the bar drinking a soda because he doesn't drink alcohol, and just like was like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. He's like, why am I here? And I saw it. So I was like trying to get all my conversations out of the way so that I could like sit down and then like have a deeper conversation with Scott. And I had several drinks, and so I was a little bit more liberal with my conversation. And so I was like, at that time what was interesting was that I had gone through my divorce and stuff. I had forgotten who the person that I had walked on the beach with. And so like when I was going through my divorce and like trying to figure out like who do I want to like marry again, or like who do I want to be again, who do I want to be with. Like, there was the image of walking on the beach, but then every time, like, I knew it was dark hair, but then, like, every time the face turned around, it was blank, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I was just seeing this kind of memory over and over and over again.
Without the face.
To the point where, like, when I was dating my type A self, I was like, every single person, like, went on a walk on the beach, and, like, I did, like, a very algorithmic kind of, like, date, and I was like, is that you? Nope, not quite. And so, you know, I was talking to Scott, and I had forgotten that whole memory because my brain had just blocked it out because it was traumatic. And so then Scott told me, he was like, yeah, he's like, and I asked him, I was like, how come you never asked me out when we were in high school? And he was like, I did. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, you didn't. You know, he's like, yes, I did. Remember Myrtle Beach and blah, blah, blah. And so then I smacked him. I was like, that was you? And like, you know, so this is why the backstory is important, because otherwise it just makes me sound crazy. And he goes, yeah, that was me. And I was like, because I was like, and then his face locked in, and I was like, oh, this is everything. This isn't just the business. This is going to be so much more. Whoa. All right, here we go. So, you know, technically the business did come first, right? And we kind of took things, you know, relatively slow, but we moved in with each other within a few months. But no, I mean, like it was so clear on both sides. And so having that sense of clarity, it made it so that it was like, well, we have to give this everything. And what's been really interesting is that I would have quit the business side had I not fallen in love.
Why is that?
It was so hard. It still continues to be so hard, right? And so having somebody who gets it, who's like my cheerleader, who knows like all of the stuff I'm going through, like on the professional level, and also like we've been able to really dig in deep to some communication issues. Like the reason that business people and engineers kind of have a tough time talking together, like we give talks now about how couples therapy helped us run a better business, right? And so that's stuff that like was uncovered because of the personal relationship,
right?
And so it's really hard to disentangle kind of everything. But for me, people were like, well, how do you work with your spouse every day? Like, and I'm like, how do you not? Like, I don't know. To me, there was a time when like Corgibytes, like we were trying to figure out what we were doing. We were having kids. Like we were like, oh, well, maybe we should actually go back and get real jobs, right? And when we did that, it was harder because I think every couple has something that they kind of rally around that is something that they're trying to build or do together. Like some couples, it's sports, right? Where they root for the same team and they like travel together and they go and do these things, right? And other couples, it's like refinishing their house, right? And it's like a project. And for us, like the project that like keeps us together and keeps us really close is the business. And we have, you know, kind of the more traditional things like, I mean, I told Scott, like when I realized that we were, you know, kind of soulmates, I was like, whew, this is tough because I know you're my soulmate. I just don't think I can live with you because we have very different, like, you know, we like different foods, we like different music, like every other kind of connection point that you might traditionally have is not a natural one for us, but we somehow make it work and it's great and I love him very, very deeply. But it's very different than the rest of the world. And I think that's part of it is that it's okay. And every relationship, you just have to make it your own.
Ooh,
and it's that
good.
same, like, rather than trying to do what the rest of the world expects, it's, you know, we're doing our own thing. So that's I don't know if that's advice. It's more just like, here's my thing.
There was advice in that in your story. No, there was. So tell us. So CEO, co-founder. Your husband is the other co-founder.
Yeah.
You have kids.
Yep.
You have a podcast. You still sit on boards. How do you? And you are type A, sometimes A plus still. How do you stay organized?
So I hire people to stay organized for me. You and I were talking about this earlier. Like, so one of the biggest things was that I found ways to hire or get support. Mm-hmm. Because one thing, it's really interesting, I hate to-do lists. Like, to-do lists, like, you would think that, like, me being really type A, like, but I tell people this and they're like, what? No, like, I am so strategic in my stuff that if I have a to-do list that's too linear, and so it drives me crazy. Like, and I hate all those little compliance things. And I was like, no, I'm gonna hire somebody else just to, like, own a to-do list for me. I'm just gonna, like, tell them, here's all the stuff that needs to be done, go do it. Right? And so it started with hiring an executive assistant that I was like, I remember it was on Twitter. This was before we had kids. This was like 5 years ago, maybe. And I had somebody who was saying, I was on Twitter, I was venting, I was like, oh my God, another 18-hour day. I feel like I'm going to collapse. Like, when is this entrepreneurial thing going to pay off? And somebody was like, hey, well, have you ever thought of an executive assistant? And I was like, actually, no, I haven't. Let me think about that a little bit more. And, I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. And so I hired somebody for 10 hours a week. And it was life-altering. Life-altering, because all of a sudden, all of those little things that were nagging me all the time, like, Stephanie took care of it. She managed my email. So then that way it's like, okay, just, I'm going to focus on this project over here. Your job is to just let me know. So I didn't have to check my email anymore. It was like, Stephanie would, like, prioritize everything for me. And just, like, did all these things that I was like, oh my gosh. So then we started hiring more people and, like, so having a support system of people, because my vision is so big, there's no way that I can achieve it on my own.
That's so good.
Right.
Was the executive assistant, was that in your budget?
No.
So, because listen, I can think of different people in the Chats with Chelsi community, and they are building, whatever, what God has called them to build, and they need help, yet
Well, I think, so here's the thing. Look at what Scott did, right? Scott came to me and said, I know that I need to build this and I need help. He had no money. He goes, I have 51% equity and I think you'd be great and here's my pitch. And I said yes. I think some of it is just exploring, is there somebody who's looking for, and you never ever want to exploit anyone, right? Right. But there are ways to, with a lot of integrity and a lot of mutual benefit, help other people, right? Like, I remember, and I was on the receiving end of this. I had my very first client, like, I said, I wanted to do this, and here's my rate. And she goes, well, I can't pay that rate in cash, but I'll give you all of these other opportunities for education and professional development, so you can attend all of my conferences and learn how to be a professional speaker, but you'd have to cut your rate in half. And I was like, okay, right? So a lot of it is just, what can you do, right? And if we think of it in terms of what am I able to find, because chances are if you're high achieving, you've got something.
Right.
There's also a lot of different groups, like there's, like you can find people online for, not as much money as you would think, kind of cutting things out in other areas, but it's really, a budget really is all about priority. And so can you shift priorities where, okay, maybe I'm not going to do this thing, but instead I'm going to invest over here. And so having support people, and now Stephanie went on, she had a baby, so I brought another person on. And she started out as my executive assistant, and then I promoted her to our content coordinator, and then she was our marketing manager, and now she's our COO. And she runs like the business, and so I can actually take a vacation. I took 10 days off from my business and like didn't check email.
How nice.
And that's a huge deal. I don't work nights, I don't work weekends anymore. Like, but I would never have gotten there if I didn't have other people helping. So I think for me, but getting there, it's like, it feels like so much lack. And I think you have to be responsible, right? Like, I've definitely had to let people go and say, you know what, this isn't working out. Like, but taking that first step and going, okay, I'm going to let somebody help me is, at least for me, has been transformative. Yeah. And
it's powerful.
Yeah. The thing that I'm working on now is like, I'm like good with delegating and hiring people for my business. And now I'm like, okay, I need some help and some support on the domestic side. So I'm like, I don't have money to have somebody like come in and wash my dishes and do my laundry. I'm in that same mental space, but I'm like, no, like you totally did this with the business. Like you can find a way, but I've got those limiting beliefs, right? But like, I know that's the thing I need to do to take my growth to the next level. But somehow I feel comfortable staying a little bit smaller and saying yes to that. I think I'm actually putting it in the way, because then it's like I'm giving myself permission to stay small. And by actually accepting that help, then it's like, okay, I'm going to have to play bigger. And that feels really scary. So I think it's less about the money, it's less about the help, and it's more about me being scared to grow.
Yet, as we've been discussing, though, there are challenges even when you are in that successful space, where the challenges continue. They just may look a little different.
Yeah.
When whenever you get to that place where you thought you would be, so the business is growing, yet it's not this fairy tale land of everything is perfect. It still involves you continuing to grow and to give of yourself, and to be confronted with those limiting beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Because that's something that I'm walking away from this conversation with. What are these limiting beliefs? And what am I going to reprioritize? How am I going to make sure that the vision that God is giving me for Life with Chelsi and Chats with Chelsi doesn't all reside on my shoulders?
Yeah. You know what I think about, because I know you're spiritual, so like there's a parable in the Bible about, talents and how everyone has their talent, right? My talent is not doing small, detail-oriented things, right? So folding laundry, dishes, so what I did was I prayed, and I was like pray, manifest, like whatever you want to call it. But I just envisioned, I was like, there's someone who's going to walk into my life who loves doing laundry, who genuinely loves like helping.
And there are people out there.
Yeah. And so I met Melissa, and she like comes in and she does that, and she like loves it. Right. And so then I can reframe it in saying, how dare I hold on to this task?
Ooh.
Because then what I'm doing is I'm not allowing this person to fully blossom in their talent.
That hit home.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, and so not only are you benefiting, but you're also creating opportunities for other people to thrive and to grow. And, I think that's something that feels deeply exciting to me, is growing a team and growing other people. We've actually used that in our branding at Corgibytes, because what we pitch is that like nobody wants to take on these projects. Like they're legacy code. Like nobody likes going into legacy code. Well, Scott was like, no, we were watching This Old House, and he goes, I want to do that with software. I want to take the projects that need the most help but have the most benefit to society, and I want to revitalize them. And like he was like, I know that's what I want to do. I have the technical expertise. I don't know how to talk about it, but that's what I want to do. And so we were like, I call ourselves the joyful janitors of the internet.
Ooh, I like that.
Like we walk into these projects, you might think of them like everybody else on your team is going to go, who would want to touch this project? And we've built a team of people where it's like, no, this brings us so much joy.
Right.
And it's different when I think when you're operating from a place of joy and a place of passion, it's fun, right? And
you don't see it as a job. It's not
exactly. And I think that helps in the sales, because then it's like, what is arduous or annoying for somebody else, it's like, no, that brings me so much joy. And so then I was like, well, maybe there's somebody who would have lots of joy folding my laundry. I don't know, right?
You found her.
Yeah, and so then it's just thinking through, like, okay, I'm going to find somebody who this is their joy.
That's so good. You dropped so many nuggets. Your tips to the young woman who just feels trapped, almost sort of in a box in some area of their life, whether it's what they're doing at home or at work or just personally, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. So when you say the word box, the first thing that comes to mind is there's a book that I read several years ago. Of course, I read a lot of books. It's like,
I'm loving it.
Here's something that somebody else who's really smart said. But no, there's a book called Poke the Box by Seth Godin. And, Seth Godin's most well known for his work in the marketing world. And it talks about how, like, if you encounter a problem, there might be kind of this perceived boundaries around it, but you don't have to be passive with those boundaries. Like, you don't have to just sit within a box. You can touch the box.
Ooh.
You can poke the box, right? Like, and, check it out and see, like, okay, well, is this what I want to do? Is this what I want to do? And then, like, you're interacting with those boundaries. And so the way that might look is, okay, well, let me experiment. All right, well, I'm kind of, I'm working at Capital One as a copywriter. I know that's not, like, my passion for the rest of my life. I don't know. This guy came along. Let me give it a shot. Let me experiment. Let me see kind of what it is, right? Or maybe it's, launching a podcast or doing something different. It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge, big commitment. It can be just, like, a poke, right? Let me try this one little thing. And so eventually what happens when you do that enough, you get this experimental mindset.
Ooh.
And then you say, well, I'm going to experiment with this, I'm going to experiment with this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. It might be, working with a different teacher or trying to get support or trying to hire somebody. Like, just, I'm going to be positive and look at all these different ways that I might be able to interact with what I'm perceiving is my boundary. Because a lot of times what we see as our boundary isn't really our boundary.
Ooh.
It's all just in our minds, right? So, like, by poking, you're going to expand it, and eventually it's like one day, like with me, with like going to this random conference and seeing this bizarre little thing on Conways Law, which doesn't mean anything to everybody else, but I had been poking the box enough, I was like, oh, now I get it. Oh my gosh, I'm going to talk about the intersection of this and this, and like now I see it, poke, I got a finger through, and then I got a fist through, and then you can tear it open, and then you can stand up and you go, woo, right? But it starts by just going like, I'm going to interact with this box a little bit. I'm going to see what I have control over, and if what is in my mind is actually there, or if it's all just an illusion.
Whew. You were just filled with wisdom and nuggets, and one thing I'm taking away from our conversation, of many things, is just being challenged to read more, listen to more books on Audible, to get so that I really can increase my experiences and wealth of knowledge is from, like you said, from other experts who've studied it, who just experienced life from a different perspective. And so
there's so much good stuff out there. And I think what's neat is that when you read a lot of different things, then you can start to, like, that's a way to poke the box, right?
Ooh.
Is like, okay, let me see what this person has to say. Let me see what, and like, I don't memorize everything, but like, I take away nuggets.
Right.
I think everybody that we interact with, and I learned so much from you too. Like, I'm so charged every time that you and I chat.
You're too kind.
No! Oh my gosh. Don't sit here and shower me with compliments and don't receive them. Come on.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay. I will take that.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is like, it's so easy to sit on the other side and be like, oh, this person has it all together. This person is like amazing, right? But we've got to allow that to receive, right? We've got to allow those compliments to land for ourselves too. Which is something I'm struggling with too. So, but yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just owning that you can do whatever, right? But then also owning that just because you can do whatever doesn't mean you have to do everything, and recognizing that you have inherent worth and dignity just because you're you.
With that, no more questions for me. For our sister friends out there who are listening, who have enjoyed hearing how you continue to confront those limiting beliefs, and how you continue to work through any boxes that may be in your life, how can they get in contact with you to learn more about you? And for those people out there who are in the software industry, because we really didn't go into the details of that, but whether they want to learn, invite you to speak, how do they get in contact with you?
So our website is Corgibytes, so Corgi like the dog, and then Bytes, B-Y-T-E-S, like computers. Our tagline is old code, new tricks. So, and Scott had a Corgi, he named the company. So, yeah, we had a Corgi, and anyway. So it's a weird name, but it works well. So Corgibytes, there's a online email field there, and it'll get to me, so if you have any questions. You can find me on Twitter at Andrea Goulet, on LinkedIn. I mean, if you Google my name, you should be able to find some stuff. I think technically on LinkedIn I'm Andrea M. Goulet. Somebody else got the first one. So not really on Instagram or Facebook or anything, but that's okay.
So Twitter.
So Twitter and
LinkedIn and your website.
Yep.
And they can check out your podcast as well.
Yeah, so the podcast, I mean, that's really designed for people who are super technical and who are working on legacy projects, but there's tons of space. So even if you don't code, if that's something that you're interested in making, there's a community that we've built there. So legacycode.rocks is kind of the place that I'm building up there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I think just, staying open and, I think LinkedIn is probably the one network that I've really invested in the most, so.
I think that may be the first for the chats. There have been guests who are on Chats with Chelsi who have a LinkedIn, but in terms of built up, yes. Yeah,
I mean, I've used LinkedIn since 2005, so I was one of the very first early adopters, and I found jobs through there. That's been my jam, and now actually I'm a LinkedIn author too. So I've created some content on. My most recent one is leading remote teams. So how do you run a team where all of your people aren't in the same location? Anyway, so I think you just got to find that one network that kind of works for you, and LinkedIn is the one that works for me. So yeah.
I'm so grateful for our time today.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Ladies, sister friends, I hope you have enjoyed our conversation as much as I have. As you know, we are in the middle of our donation drive as well as accepted nominations for the second annual Mother-to-Be celebration. And so if you know a mom, an expecting mom in need, go to lifewithchelsi.com, nominate her, or if you just want to be a part of what we're doing to bless moms in needs this summer at the baby shower, you can go to lifewithchelsi.com as well. You can donate cash, our Amazon registry, or drop off some pre-loved items. We appreciate you. Have a fabulous week. And guess what? Break out of the box. Have a great one.